we're in a sort of potentiating downward spiral. Everything they do makes it markedly worse. We stop making decisions and policies for the betterment of our individual countries. I think Starmer is fundamentally anti-British. I don't think he believes in this country. Their idea of levelling up is to chuck more money at the problem. It's top-down control. You've got to take the knee of the state off the neck of workers and private enterprise. Well, I mean, people are voting with their feet. They're leaving the United Kingdom because we've got to restore the United Kingdom's very existence. And it's going to be a very painful process. You're absolutely right to call it a revolution. It's a revolution against the global order. It's not the criminals you should be protecting. You've got to be harsh with the criminals. It's the victims who need protecting, and the Human Rights Act has turned that on its head. Tony Blair is the devil. We need a party like Advance that is going to be unbowed in calling out the system for what the system is.
But how do you see Tommy Robinson in all of this? The police came into my coffee shop the other day, and it was after my announcement.
Yeah.
And they walked out. I was like, oh no, I'm going to be in trouble here. Strangely, they said we support the idea. But anyway, I tell you what I want to start with you today.
Yeah.
Good to see you again, Ben.
Good to see you, Peter. Thank you for having me.
No, any time.
Yeah.
So when I started making this show, I really wanted it to be a open platform. Anyone can come on, admit my political bias, but be as objective as possible. I now find that very hard. I think I agree with you that our country is on essentially life support. I cannot dislike this government we have anymore, and I'm finding being objective and balanced very hard because in my heart, this government is no longer serving the people of this country. I think it's committing economic vandalism, and I want them gone as soon as possible. And that's really hard when you want to be an objective interviewer, when you see so many people going through so much pain, which I think is unnecessary. So yeah, that's where I'm at, Ben.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. I don't have to be impartial.
Yeah,
I'm here to be partial, I think.
It's so bad out there.
It is bad at every level. And I mean, I don't know if we're filming now.
We are filming. We're on.
We are. Okay, so I mean, I think that the real issue, I think, with the United Kingdom, leave the economy aside for a second. The real issue is we've had governance for the last 30-odd years, a series of governments that haven't put this country first, and constitutionally, culturally, for the people. And ultimately, the economy can only function if actually you protect the very foundations and integrity of your system through which prosperity used to be delivered. But we've set that aside in the pursuit, we probably discussed this last time I was on, but in the pursuit of governing through a global prism for the global betterment, with international institutions making, a significant number of the laws which we apply domestically, we've ceased to do what's right for the British people and for this country. And we are now hijacked by what I would call this international liberal global order, to the point where domestic policy is almost incapable now of delivering for the country. And we're going down a spiral. And once you're in that spiral, of course, the economy will suffer dramatically. And we're in a sort of potentiating downward spiral. Everything they do makes it markedly worse.
Where does this liberal global order come from, and what are their incentives at play here? Because it's clearly not working anywhere they're trying to.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can all try and make sense of it. The way I've made sense of it is, for me, it all goes back to post-World War II. We emerged from World War II with nations bruised, with the concept of muscular nation states being questioned because, we had Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, the United States, all at war, Japan. And there was a recognition, and an understandable and correct recognition, that there needed to be cooperation on the international stage if war like that was to be avoided again. And so lots of supranational institutions were set up in the aftermath of World War II, such as the European Convention of Human Rights, which effectively started operating, I think, in 1959 by memory. The UN was set up. The roots of the European Union were set up, the World Bank, etc., etc. And I think to start with, those organizations worked extremely well because we went to them, we were members of them as members, individual member states going there as proud countries seeking to cooperate. But through the progression of the empowerment of these institutions, we've ceased to go to them as independent members and become almost enmeshed in them, like we're part of them. And perhaps the best example is the European Union, where it's gone from being a trading bloc for the betterment of Europe to literally taking down borders across Europe. And there can be no bigger recognition of the attack on nation states than removing its borders. If you haven't got a border, you're no longer a nation state. So we talk about Germany as a nation state, but actually Germany, even though it's now recently putting back its borders, the Schengen zone had removed them. France had its borders removed through this, mingling at the EU level. And even though the EU is perhaps the starkest example of where nation states have been set aside, actually it's happening at all sorts of levels, like the UN, the International Court of Justice, which is meant to be just an advisory court. It ruled that Chagos should be part of Mauritius. The casting vote was a Chinese judge on the UN, and we duly handed Chagos over to Mauritius. We were dictated to by a court that was merely meant to be advisory. We're not bound by the International Court of Justice's rulings. So we've got to a stage where we've gone from a recognition that international cooperation is required to an extreme form of cooperation where nation states themselves are being set aside. And the balance has been lost. And so we've stopped, all right across Western civilization, we've stopped making decisions and policies for the betterment of our individual countries. We are now effectively governing through the global prism. Of course, Trump is making a decided stand against it and saying, I'm going to change that. We're going to put our borders up. We're going to ditch DEI. We're going to ditch net zero. We're going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to put America first. We're going to put tariffs on countries that are exploiting our trade, etc. He's now reasserting the United States of America. And it is high time that nation states do reassert themselves. The challenge, I think, is going to be the first challenge is, can we reassert nation states? We're struggling, particularly in Europe. Will Trump succeed in the US? And I think then the other question that arises in my mind for those of us who want a peaceful world is in the reestablishment of our nationhood, are we going to end up creating geopolitical problems which might result in war? And that's the difficult juggling act that we've now got.
I don't believe this Labour government has an intention of restoring our sovereignty.
Not at all. It's taking us back into the European Union.
By the back door.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent we never really left because, we left Northern Ireland behind. We were hitched at the hip in matters of state aid, employment, environment, competition. Even the ECHR is a commitment under the EU treaties we signed. We signed up to their European Defence Fund. People aren't aware that we're paying hundreds of millions a year developing weaponry for the European Union. I don't know how many people are aware of that. So we never really left. But Starmer is taking us ever closer into the European Union. He's now considering freedom of movement, for people up to a certain age, and that'll be the thin end of the wedge. He's aligning us in sanitary and phytosanitary regulations, which basically means that the EU laws in those subjects will be adhered to by the United Kingdom. And if they find that we're not adhering to them, it'll be the European Court of Justice that will determine whether or not we're fined. And we're doing the same thing with the carbon trading system, on goods that, to the extent that they've got carbon in them, we're going to be paying EU taxes on it. So Starmer hasn't really woken up, I think, to if he has woken up, he welcomes the threats. He either hasn't woken up or he welcomes the threats that globalism are now causing to Western civilization. He also hasn't woken up to the change of direction in the United States. And if Trump succeeds, as I really hope he does, if Trump succeeds, then the damage that we're doing to ourselves in this country will be even greater, because a resurgent America will attract capital and people. The best people will move to the States and capital will invest in the States. And if we don't keep up with what they're doing in the US, we will be denuded of capital and people. And we're seeing that already, Peter, aren't we?
Well, I wonder what drives Starmer, because he must be aware of how bad the economy is. He must be aware of how deeply unpopular he is and his party is. At what point does he reflect and consider that maybe he's taking his party, this country, in the wrong direction?
So
I struggle to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Starmer, I think I've said this many times, and people roll their eyes when I say it, and I forgive you if you roll your eyes
Okay.
if I say it and you don't agree. But I think Starmer is fundamentally anti-British. I don't think he believes in this country.
Right.
No one who believed in the United Kingdom would wish to take us back into the global morass after the global morass has been so evidently seen to be failing. The assault on our borders, our inability to protect ourselves from assault, literally by people coming across in droves in dinghies. This should be a wake-up call for the British nation. But he wants more of that, and he doesn't really care about the betterment of this country. He is completely wedded to the ideology of governance through particularly the EU. He's a complete Europhile. So I think he individually, and no doubt many members of his cabinet, if not all of them, are anti-British in that sense. I can't make a case for describing him as pro-British, given that he wishes to be governed by a third power, by a foreign power, and to take our borders down. These are fundamentally anti-nation state movements. But also, I think there's something deeper than that, which is that our entire institutional framework and the mindset, even of the Conservative Party, is now hijacked by this global order. It's so hard for the organism to change direction because all received wisdom heads in that direction. I mean, I'll give you one example. So part of this liberal global order is massive state intervention, either from an EU level or from our own governments. Private enterprise has been sat on repeatedly in the pursuit of this global betterment. Private enterprise, which is, muscular in the sense that it's promoting itself domestically, has been very significantly set aside. And you and I, being businessmen, know that cutting taxes and having a low taxation regime can be absolutely invigorating for business. But you'll never hear about this government cutting taxes. When it comes, and the minute anyone wants to cut taxes, they say, well, that's an unfunded tax cut. You can't do it. We can't afford the debt that we would have to take on to cut that tax. But they have no shortage of ability to spend money.
Mm-hmm.
Their idea of levelling up is not cutting taxes in the north and giving people an opportunity and create the opportunity for aspiration in the north. Their idea of levelling up is to chuck more money at the problem. It's top-down control and top-down an attempt from the top to try and energize the disadvantaged parts of our country, rather than giving people the tools that they need to do it themselves. And that too is, part of this liberal global order versus, I don't know how old you are, but I'm a Thatcher. I was 13 when Thatcher came to office, and I was 20. I was 25, 26 when she left.
I remember the tail end.
Yeah,
I remember the riots.
I was 24. Yeah, 25.
But I've done my review of history. I've watched a lot of her old speeches. I'm a big Thatcher fan.
Yeah, but I mean, she totally understood. You've got to take the knee of the state off the neck of workers and private enterprise if you want them to function. And ultimately, the state requires workers, the middle class, and private enterprise to function, because without it, there is no real generation of wealth. Everything else is just state spending and borrowing.
Yeah, well, look, I was telling you before we started recording, I've got 2 businesses in my town centre. The bar has halved in turnover in 2 years. The coffee shop is new and it's not making money yet. I'll continue them both on. But I'm also sat there on capital, ready to deploy. I want to start new businesses. I want to open a pizza place and a burger. I want my high street to thrive. It's too hard out there for so many different reasons. Firstly, there has been a cost of living crisis. People just have less money to spend. We see that. But if you layer in the bureaucracy, the red tape, the employment rights, the cost of products, the cost of energy, it's very, very hard to create a business. Businesses in our town centre that should be viable are closing down, and new ones aren't opening. I'm really digging in at the local level, Ben, just trying to understand how is this happening and how do you turn it around? And I mean, look, I've got some notes on this because I actually spent some time with our local council. I went to see the mayor and I went to see the guy who runs the finance side, just trying to understand how is it the council is broke? How do you have no money? And I looked into all the legislation that is that local governments are required to follow: the Housing Act 1996, the Homeless Reduction Act 2017, the Local Government Finance Act 1992, the Children and Families Act 2014, the Education Act 1996, the Sen Code of Practice 2015, Children's Act 1989, the Care Act 2014, blah blah. It goes on and on and on. And what ends up happening is central government come up with ideas and they say, local councils, you figure this out. But there's a limit to how much they can raise council tax. Central government keeps taking money from the business rates. So essentially our local councils, they're all kind of broke. Most of them are broke. They're all broke. Yeah. But the town centres are dying. Yeah. And I just think we need a drastic review of all this legislation. We need some autonomy at the local level so local councils can actually work for the local people, because it's just not working.
I mean, one thing I say to the extent that I have any opportunity to speak to Labour ministers, which is not often, thankfully.
They don't like talking.
Instead of talking about tax cuts, which is like a red rag to a bull, the thing to say is, well, cut regulations. It doesn't cost anyone to cut regulations. Just cut them. Because every regulation, again, Peter, as you'll know better than I do, every regulation adds a cost to business, adds a cost to one's existence, because you've got to either produce a label or adhere to a particular process or adhere to a particularly high standard or whatever. Everything is a cost. Every regulation is friction. And if you want the economy to start coming back to life and you feel you're too scared to cut taxes because you're going to go bust as a government, then deregulate. But they don't even do that. In fact, the regulations that are coming out of this government are deeply, deeply damaging to business. The Employment Rights Bill is going to be hell. The reforms that they're doing to housing are going to be hell. You can't get rid of a tenant from your own property. So why would you want to be a landlord? And same with employees. You won't be able to fire someone. The minute you've taken them on, they've got protected status. That opportunity you used to have in the olden days, it used to be 2 years you had to make someone redundant without cause. Then they brought it down to 1 year, and now they're just going to get rid of it completely. So if you make a mistake hiring someone, you can't sack them, which means you're going to be really reluctant to employ anyone. You're going to be really doubly careful, aren't you?
Well, they also, these people clearly haven't run a business, because I've had to get rid of people before. We've had to go through the consultation phase. But really, you can get rid of people. It's not actually that hard, but what you have to do is you have to spend a lot of money on the right HR company to come in to make sure you follow the process exactly right to get rid of them. Yeah. But what I would say to these people who create the legislation is, I can get rid of anyone I want in my business. I just have to manufacture it in a very clear, detailed, set out process.
Yeah, ticking boxes.
Ticking boxes. I still get rid of them. But what you've created is this layer of bureaucracy and capital waste. I mean, it's just a waste of capital on HR companies to get rid of people I would have got rid of anyway. And actually, when I was my first few jobs, I had some rubbish jobs, Ben. I've put hammers on. I've hammered handles on umbrellas and run a milk round. Yeah. If you were shit at your job, somebody got rid of you, and that was a learning exercise. And I think it's a great learning exercise to be able to sack somebody and say, you're fired, and this is why I'm firing you.
It's a necessary component of the economic organism. Yeah. It's how you become efficient.
It's how you learn. Yeah. If you can't just sack somebody, if you have to... I mean, I've had the employment law thrown at us. I've had somebody who did something deeply troubling. They had to be got rid of, but their parent, who is an employment lawyer, just threw the book at us. All these different processes and procedures that we hadn't followed. And so we faced a situation where I could have gone to a tribunal, which I would have lost, or pay them off. And I ended up paying off somebody who made a terrible, deeply disturbing mistake within a company.
And that's all a cost on your business.
It's all a cost on your business. It's like the accountancy cost on our business now. It's insane. And sometimes I think, Ben, why am I bothering? I'm not making any money in these businesses. I'm employing lots of people. I'm giving lots of money to government, which is being wasted. Why bother?
Yeah. Well, I mean, people are voting with their feet. They're leaving the United Kingdom. The numbers speak for themselves. Thousands of millionaires have left. But I can tell you anecdotally that lots of people I knew who were very happily living in the British citizens living in the United Kingdom, friends of mine who lived here all their lives, have left. They've gone to Italy. They've gone to Dubai. Some have gone to Portugal. They're leaving.
Safe, low tax.
Safe, low tax.
Yeah, it's deeply troubling, and I think the civil unrest we saw previously, I feel like it's coming back. I think we've got these little tinderboxes that are exploding all around the country, and my expectation is we're going to see quite severe civil unrest. I don't like this talk of civil war. I find that troubling.
Yeah.
But I see it. We have there's a deep unfairness that exists within our country now, Ben. I'll just give you another example. So we run this business here, this podcast. We have business rates that we have to pay. I got a note that was left on the door from a debt collection agency saying you haven't paid your business rates. And me and Kurt were like, what's this about? Because Kurt will tell you I'm a fast payer. When an invoice comes in, I pay it. And we hadn't had any post, so we hadn't received. So I immediately went and paid it. It was £18,000. The debt collection agency came in and said, well, that's the business rates. But I mean, £18,000 for 6 months in this? Yeah. What am I getting for it? But they said, you haven't paid the collection charge, which is £1,750. I said, I'm not paying it. I've not received the bill. They said, but they said, it's your duty to know. You should have chased the bill. I said, that's not how running a business works. You don't sit there every day waking up going, which bills have I not received? It turns out that a new landlord took over the property. They used to post us our post. They don't. They leave it in a big pile in a cupboard downstairs. We weren't aware. And so that change means a nearly £2,000 fine. I mean, I'm refusing to pay it, but my expectation, Ben, is that what's going to happen is I'll get taken to court and I'll be forced to pay this bill, this fee. And there's a deep unfairness in that. And there's a deep unfairness, I think, across the country now in that the law-abiding citizens are being punished through taxation and regulation and feeling unsafe. And anyone who chooses to break the law is just kind of getting away with it.
Absolutely. Well,
it's not a fair society.
No, it isn't. And those who haven't contributed to society get bailed out by society. Those of us who are working and paying keep getting clobbered. And of course, there's a very unhealthy relationship, I think, between those on benefits and the Labour Party, because as the number of people on benefits go up, actually it suits the Labour Party to be generous on benefits because they want their vote. So you end up in this kind of really bad cycle again. There's so much going wrong with the country. And we need a root and branch reform, restoration, actually, to start with. You know, I talked about the constitutional, cultural and damage to the people ahead of the economy. I don't think we can fix the economy until we've got our grounding reaffirmed again. You know, we've got to go back to being the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the government and parliamentarians understanding that they serve us and no one else. And, you know, they should never, no parliamentarian should ever utter the words, we can't do this because of international law. That is an abrogation of their obligation to the British people. When I hear that, I just think, what the hell is wrong with you? Go and renegotiate the treaty or repudiate the treaty or pass a law that nullifies the treaty's effect in the United Kingdom. If we need to do it for this country, get it done.
Say no.
Yeah, say no. Your primary obligation is to this country.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
There's a book I've been reading called The Populist Delusion. Is it Populist Delusion? I think that's correct. It talks about how populists see the problems of the country. Very good at explaining the problems of the country. Very appealing to people because they all tend to agree. But when they get into power, they really struggle to make change because of entrenched interests.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm wondering what type of character could actually make a big difference to this country, because I'm very fearful of us keep repeating this cycle. Whether it's a conservative government we get in 4 years' time or a reform government, that's still not much will change. I feel like we almost need a Bukele Millet type character who's willing to come in. But do we have that kind of person in the UK?
So we're going to have to find one pretty damn quickly, because if we don't, we're going to go down the Swanee, aren't we? So, I mean, what we've got to do, just to reiterate, it would be a massive task for any incoming government simply to repeal the laws that have damaged us so badly. But that has to be the first task. One of the problems I think the Conservatives had in the last government was, instead of going back to the root of the problem, they just started putting sticking plasters over the top. So a really good example recently was Toby Young, who runs the Free Speech Union, was fighting for a law that would assure freedom of speech in our educational establishments. Now, we don't need a law to assure freedom of speech. What we need to do is get rid of all the laws that have been put in place that prohibit freedom of speech.
Yeah.
I had no problem with speaking freely when I was an adolescent and young man in this country. It's only now that freedom of speech is being so fundamentally compromised. And to pass a law to oblige everyone to allow freedom of speech is as much as I have sympathy with the motive, it's the wrong answer. The real correct answer is to unpick all the laws and all the regulations which brought us to that point. So the first job of any incoming government has to be of a constitutional nature. It has to basically undo all the damage that Tony Blair and successive governments have done to the legislative framework of the United Kingdom. And there will be economic pain, actually. There'll be first economic pain as you undo it. But any incoming government has to come in actually armed with draft legislation, hit the road running, and get rid of all the damaging acts. So we've got to get rid of the Human Rights Act, get rid of the Equalities Act, get rid of the Climate Change Act, get rid of the independence of the Supreme Court, frankly put them back into the House of Lords. We've got to repeal all these employment rights bills. They're coming out with a law now where we're going to have to keep a register of the different ethnicities of people that we employ, and we're going to have to make sure that there isn't an ethnic wage gap. There used to be a gender wage gap issue. Yeah, you're going to have to make a note of the ethnicity of all your employees, and that, to me, is embedding racism in society. I mean, that's another question, because you're having to ascribe an ethnicity to people in order to determine whether or not they're being paid fairly. That is asking you to be prejudiced. It's inviting employers to have a view on people's ethnicity, whereas employers should be amoral organizations which simply act for the pursuit of profit and paying their creditors, employing people, etc. They shouldn't be having to make those kinds of judgments. And so we've got to repeal all this crap, if I can use that word. We just got to get rid of this crap and go back to we were basically, I think, a reasonably sound country from a legislative framework perspective, constitutional perspective, back in 1995, 1996. We've got to go back to 1995, 96 before we can really move forward with reforms. Reform isn't the answer. We need repealing, and when we're exhausted with repealing, we've got to repeal some more. Got to burn the house down of all these regulations.
Do you think enough of the public understand this?
Probably not, because I think the most tangible impact that these regulations have on the public, they're economic in nature. And when you think of economic adversity, you don't immediately think, well, it's one of these acts that you quoted at me, the Children's Act 1992 or whatever it is, that's causing me headache. But if you plot the impact of each of the regulations you quoted, acts of parliament you quoted, if you plot their impacts and then add up all the damage, they all potentiate each other. They all make things worse for each other. Are you with me?
Yeah.
And that all then manifests itself in the economy. And we tend to think about economic management just through monetary policy and fiscal policy. So everyone goes, well, cut taxes. But you can't cut taxes till you got rid of all this crap. You've got to get rid of all this crap. You can't cut taxes, but you got to get rid of. This is the fundamental problem. It's the regulatory noose into which the United Kingdom has now put its neck, and we've got to remove it.
Yeah. So I think of that as well. Actually, tell you a different thing. I had John Redwood in here the other day. Great, really fantastic man to talk to. He talked about when Thatcher first came into power. And he said there was a lot of pain. There was recession. He got quite emotional because he talked about both of his parents losing their jobs.
Yeah.
And obviously having quite a disdain for Thatcher. And he explained, look, this is necessary. I'm sorry, but this is necessary. We have to go through this. And once they got through the pain, the country flourished under Thatcher. And I think you're talking about a very similar scenario that we have to, I guess a constitutional rethink of the country. It feels like a rebellion. It feels like I don't want to say revolution, but it's a necessary 180 in the country.
It is. It's a 180-degree change we need. Absolutely right. Thatcher wasn't grappling. What Thatcher was grappling with was the social implications of socialism. But the constitutional framework of the country was secure. There was no threat to the existence of the United Kingdom. Our culture wasn't threatened. Our people weren't threatened. There was a settlement, a fundamental settlement. She had to fix the economy. Her job, Thatcher's job, we think of it as a very tough job she had. I think it pales in significance compared to the job we now have on our hands, because we've got to restore the United Kingdom's very existence. And it's going to be a very painful process. You're absolutely right to call it a revolution. It's a revolution against the global order. It's a revolution of the United Kingdom asserting itself again. And that's why in my opening remarks, I mentioned that, in the process of doing that, we've got to be careful of not going too far, because then we might end up inadvertently in war. I mean, we are talking about the stuff of war, because when we reassert the United Kingdom, there will be other countries in the world who will be damaged, and they won't like the damage that comes with it. America's reassertion of itself is going to damage us. No mistake. Them recharging their economy, or supercharging it, or, drill, baby, drill, attracting capital, attracting people, will hurt us here. And they've put tariffs on us for a start, haven't they? So there will be pain unless we react to what's going on and do the same kind of things that Trump is doing and bring back the nation state. And we've got to do it. I'm very, very keen on peace. I don't want a violent revolution and or civil unrest. So we've got to do it. We've got to do it in a way that doesn't kick anything off.
I was reading about the Velvet Revolution last night in Czechoslovakia, how that was a peaceful revolution, but they did manage to bring down the government. And I'll probably get arrested for saying this. Probably Starmer's goons are listening in, but I want to be on the street protesting now, Ben.
Yeah. If you're feeling that, you're feeling that, and you're well endowed, aren't you?
Well, I just look at what's happening in my local town. That's where my heart is. It's in Bedford. I look at what's happening in our local town. I see the decline. I mean, let me show you this photo. This is something new. We wouldn't have had this before. This is brand new. But I get up in the morning. I go to my coffee shop. That's 8:30 in the morning.
No, exactly.
And we have addicts and alcoholics and shoplifters plaguing the town. Shops are closed. Businesses are closing down. Nobody's making any money. And I'm so fed up because I think it's all unnecessary. I just think of the incentives. I'm sat there with somebody who's got capital ready to deploy. I'm not deploying it. I'm not creating the jobs because I know the businesses will fail. And the businesses will fail because we're taxing people too much and it's too hard to build a business. Yeah. I know how to fix it. I would, some people have said, Pete, run for mayor in Bedford. I wouldn't do the job because I spent time with the mayor and I think it's an impossible job. But if the government created a zone of economic opportunity, gave it some autonomy and some freedom, I think these things are fairly easy to fix. I think we need a strict rule of law. I think we need more prisons. I think we need to imprison persistent criminality. But at every level, in every direction, Ben, I think we're failing. And it's all downstream from the government. And I blame the Conservatives as much as I blame Labour. And I want to be on the street and I want to protest. I do. Yeah. I'm fed up of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the protection of criminals, we see it, don't we? We see people being imprisoned for what they've said on X.
Yeah.
And violent criminals being released from jail. What kind of message is that sending out on law and order? Our conviction rates anyway for serious crime were only down at 2%. 2%.
Yeah.
That's our conviction rate. And then we're releasing them once they're in prison. So the message we're sending is really bad. And perhaps this is a good moment to mention it. I think one of the worst acts of parliament ever passed was the Human Rights Act, because it did many, many things which were damaging to this country. One, it equated foreigners in terms of their rights to British citizens. So there was no concept after the Human Rights Act that being a British citizen afforded you any greater privilege in this country. Immigrants have every right to everything that you do as a British citizen, because the Human Rights Act gets rid of any privilege of citizenry. That's the first thing. And so it allows mass immigration, because who cares at that point? Everyone's equal. And so we've had this mass immigration that's taken place, particularly over the last few years. And the other thing it does is, in the pursuit of protection of human rights, it's protecting criminals, not victims. You know, it's really funny. I have the pleasure of knowing someone who's just recently retired, senior officer in Pakistani law enforcement. And I asked him why it was that Pakistan wasn't taking back these rapists who've been gang raping underage white girls. And he said Pakistan would gladly take these people back. In fact, we have a treaty with the United Kingdom, he said, called the Pakistan Prisoner Transfer Treaty, pursuant to which, signed in 2018, pursuant to which the British government can send back to Pakistan any prisoners who have got Pakistani nationality, and they can serve out their time in Pakistan. And in Pakistan, they take paedophilia very seriously. You know, in jail, they will have a very bad time, and it'll be a fraction of the cost of keeping them in jail in the United Kingdom. And he said to me, do you know why no one's ever, we haven't been called on by the British government to take any Pakistani prisoners back? And the reason is the European Convention of Human Rights, the Human Rights Act, because the criminals have to give their consent to being sent back to Pakistan.
Which they're not going to do.
Of course they're not going to do it. They're going to sit in a prison and be fed dal and rice for the next, 15 years while they're treated harshly. And he said, you lot in the UK don't understand who needs to be, you've lost connection with the protection of victims. It's not the criminals you should be protecting. You've got to be harsh with the criminals. It's the victims who need protecting, and the Human Rights Act has turned that on its head. So we see examples, and I'm sure you've seen this, Peter, of people who are not deported because rapists who are not deported because it infringes their family life in the UK. Did you see that?
I saw, wasn't there one who sexually assaulted his own daughter?
Could be. And,
yeah.
The examples are horrendous. And the victims are never protected. It's the criminals who are always getting the protection of the courts. And it goes back to this Human Rights Act. It is, I think, the single most damaging bit of legislation that's ever been brought onto the British statute books. I used not to fully understand it. I used to think the ECHR and its embodiment in our domestic law, the HRA, was something that we could cope with if we just got rid of the European Court. It's much worse than that. It has absolutely infected every part of the United Kingdom. It has to go. And the fact that the Conservative Party hasn't come round to denouncing the Human Rights Act yet, that Kemi is still examining her navel, tells you she doesn't understand the severity of the consequences of that single act of Parliament. And so many other regulations have come off the back of it that have been damaging to this country.
Can we just ignore it? What happens? What is the consequence of ignoring it?
It's our law now. It's in domestic law. So we have to repeal the domestic law. And then we have to tell the institution to sling a hook. And that takes those two acts alone requires such enormous fortitude that I wonder if anyone in Parliament has what's required. That's why an incoming government, I think Labour's going to go at the next election,
yes. By the way.
It doesn't matter whether it's a Reform government, a Reform and Conservative coalition, or a Reform alliance, Advance UK and Conservative government. Labour's going to go. But the critical thing is that an incoming government can't come in and then start examining its navel. It can't.
It has to be ready to go.
It's got to be absolutely bloody ready to go. So on day one, there was a moratorium on indefinite leave to remain, a moratorium on granting British citizenship, repealing the Human Rights Act and the Equalities Act on day one. Send a bombshell through the legislative framework, do a melee, burn the house down. There will be consequences. Mm-hmm. But take the consequences and inform the nation that this is what we're going to do. We're going to restore the United Kingdom. We're going to restore our borders on day one, and there will be international pushback. The EU will immediately impose a trade war on the United Kingdom. It will not like what we're doing. It will not like the fact that we're putting our country first.
Well, the bureaucrats won't. But what I think will happen is the citizens of those countries will be like, well, we want some of that.
Yeah, we want some of that. The people are already with us. Yeah. Absolutely. And we're with them too.
Yeah.
You know, I want a proud France, a proud, independent, prosperous Germany, Italy. I want those countries to go back to being what they were. I don't want this morass. You know, we need Western Europe and Western civilization more generally to be back on its feet, don't we?
Do you think as a nation we've failed to shame Tony Blair enough for what he's done?
We've entirely failed. We have not revealed the damage that Tony Blair did. You can trace back just about everything that's damaging to the fabric of our country now to Tony Blair. What he did under cover of a mild reformation was actually revolutionary, what he did. He changed our judicial system. He changed our monetary system. He changed our recognition of what it means to be British. He changed the fabric, the foundations of this country, and he set in train all the damage that we're now experiencing. Tony Blair is the devil. And I see it very, very clearly now. As a 32-year-old, when he came to office, I didn't see it. He looked like a decent human being. He said, you know, many things that I thought were fine.
The country felt like it was going in a good direction.
Yeah.
The nation was, I don't know, it was bubbling. It felt good under Tony Blair.
It did. Labour, it was all on your front foot.
Yeah, I didn't vote for them, but I definitely felt the energy of the nation.
I didn't vote either. I voted for John Major.
Yeah, I'm saying that it was one of my first elections I ever voted in. But now I see him as an evil man. I see him evil for what he's taken us into Iraq. I throw Alistair Campbell in the same bucket as him. I think all these people are evil. I feel like Tony Blair needs to be shamed.
I mean, Iraq was such a bad venture.
Yes.
Such a bad venture. You know, we complain about all the illegal migration, but we've gone abroad and we've stirred it up.
Yeah, of course.
Iraq was a totally unnecessary war. Sure, Saddam was a bastard, but we had no right to go in and stir the country up, killing 600,000 people and leaving a failed state effectively behind, which is what we did in Libya. Mm-hmm. And we nearly succeeded in turning Egypt into a failed state. Thankfully, they got a grip of it at the last minute. We turned Syria into a failed state. Assad, a bastard. Absolutely. Better that bastard than what we've now got in Syria and all the pain that's taken place since then.
Well, he protected the Christians.
And he had prosperity. His people were under control. And, so Jordan, Jordan thankfully escaped it. But Saudi nearly fell with the Arab Spring. And of course, our intervention in Afghanistan. What did we have to show for 22 years?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
We've just given them a military. We've given them all the tanks.
$80 billion worth of armaments behind.
Absolute insanity. Okay, let's talk about Advance.
Yeah.
I mean, launching a new party isn't easy. Trying to win seats is going to be very difficult. There is to the voting public, there is a strong overlap between Advance, Reform, and even Restore. A lot of people like myself who've looked at this as Reform as a potential party that might win, might make some change. Look at what you're doing and look at what Rupert are doing. We're outside of the disagreements, the fallings out, and we see three groups that are kind of all trying to take us in a similar-ish direction. What is it that Advance are going to do? What is your hope for the party?
So, Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain's not a party.
I know it's not a party, but it says it might. He hints of what he might do with it. It's a political movement.
Yeah, in my view, it's incapable of converting to a party because it is by definition cross-party. So, in order to convert it to a party, he would fragment his support base in the movement. Are you with me?
No, but I feel like you're all pointing in.
Yeah,
you're all pointing in a similar direction with some differences.
Rupert and I are completely in agreement that the country needs a restoration and we need to restore our constitution and our culture and reacquaint ourselves with what it means to be the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that is where we differ with Reform and the Conservatives. Reform's name reveals, now that I see Reform more clearly with Nigel Farage in charge, Reform more clearly reveals, I think, its adolescent understanding of what's required. So, for example, Reform talks about proportional representation. We don't need any electoral reform in this country. If we want the 180-degree change that you mentioned,
you need a majority.
You need an outright blooming majority. Proportional representation would destroy this country. We would have no way back, because it would have, every government would be a compromise. And if you compromise starting from where we're at the moment, you'll never be able to correct the position. We need a very strong majority of coming in to unpick all the things that I've mentioned. So Advance UK, even though it appears on the tin to do many of the things that Reform says it's going to do, is actually a markedly different party. We stand for nation-state of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in all its parts and all its people. So we're completely against the Northern Ireland Protocol, for example. The Conservative Party brought in the protocol. And that too, by the way, just to repudiate the Northern Ireland Protocol will be seismic. People think it's a minority sport talking about Northern Ireland. But if we want to take Northern Ireland back into the United Kingdom, which I think is a fundamental prerequisite to us establishing our own identity as a country, we will again be in a trade war with the European Union. We will have the Republic of Ireland up in arms against us, proverbial arms rather than real arms. But we've got to, unless and until we take that first step, we're not even a country. So we've got to do that. Reform isn't on for that. Reform believes that a united Ireland is inevitable. Freedom of speech is absolutely critical. So Advance UK is not going to throw any of its members or any of its people under a bus simply because they said something stupid on Twitter a few years ago. We've got to reacquaint ourselves with the importance of what you do rather than what you said. Of course, an incitement to violence is unacceptable. But
that's the red line.
That's the red line, an incitement to violence.
But also, how high is the bar on that?
It's very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with CASA.
Well, we had perfectly good laws that prevented incitement to violence until about 1997 again. And ever since then, it's become really more about whether I offend you, Peter, and what I say. I must muzzle myself if I offend you. But I should be allowed to offend you. We should.
I'm fine with that. But let's use the common example, Lucy Connolly.
Yeah.
Abhorrent tweet. She took it down. What is the bar? I mean, I don't think she should be in prison.
No, in my mind, there was no incitement to violence in her tweet because she said, burn down the hotels for all I care.
Yes.
And those words at the end, they qualified her thinking. They revealed that actually she's just what she was expressing was anger. She wasn't advising people to go out and burn down hotels. But again, what we've got there is an example of the global liberal order putting its knee on the British people's neck. Because what happened in Southport was an example of where mass immigration and a splintering in our culture has gone wrong. Axel Rudakabana is not a Welshman, like Keir Starmer described him to be. He's second-generation Rwandan. He may hold a British passport. He's not a Welshman. And it was deflection by the government. And Starmer wanted to protect the multicultural experiment that's been forced on this country. And so he wanted to deflect from Axel Rudakabana being who he is. And part of that deflection involved categorizing all those who protest as far right. And in categorizing them as far right and literally throwing the criminal justice system at them, he was trying to legitimize the multicultural failed experiment that's taking place. So people like Lucy Connolly had to go to jail because he was protecting his ideology. And this is where you see the two-tier criminal justice system being absolutely revealed for what it is. And one of the things Advance UK stands for is equality under the law. You have to be blind about the ethnicity and background and so on of the individuals involved. And again, I don't want to turn this into an attack on reform.
No, but that's fine. Look, we've opened this room to reform. Richard Tice has been in, Zia's been in. They've been in, and I've listened to them, and I've liked some of the things they said, and I've challenged them. But if there's criticism for reform,
but they were very silent during this. Farage said that he was in possession of the details of the biggest political scandal of his life. That's what he said back in October 2023.
I think I know what that is as well. I was told, I don't know if we're allowed to mention it because I think there's an injunction or a rumoured injunction. I think I know what it is.
But if it is the biggest political scandal of your life, you have parliamentary privilege.
Of course.
And you should use it. And it hasn't been used. And Reform were very quiet about the Southport protests. Farage was, in my view, cowed by the fear of him being accused of being a participant in inciting violence. And so Reform completely vacated that, the campaign, effectively for justice that followed the incarceration of all those people who said what they said but didn't actually do anything, including Peter Lynch, who hanged himself in prison.
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah. And you and I can't remember whether we were saying this before the program started or during the program, but I can't imagine any fate worse than being imprisoned wrongly. If I go to prison, at least I want to know that I'm in prison because I deserve to be there.
Yeah.
But, to be in prison and to have the stigma associated with the damage it will do to your life when you get out, it's very difficult to recover from that. To know that you will always carry that burden with you was too much for him. He killed himself in prison. No one talks about Peter Lynch. He's just been forgotten. And so we need a party like Advance that is going to be unbowed in calling out the system for what the system is. Mm-hmm. Now, the argument that people will make against me is, Ben, you're going to split the vote. You're going to,
potentially
Labour back in through the back door. The first thing I would say is that there's no vote to split because the Conservative Party is not conservative. It hasn't yet found its conservative DNA. There are some really good people in the Conservative Party, but it hasn't found its conservative DNA. Reform isn't doing the job. Reform is going, by Farage's own declaration last week, it's going to be further left, he says, of the Conservative Party, further left than the Conservative Party by the next election. And they also threw Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick under a bus last week. One of the things, I just talk about this, I think it's really important. Yeah. One of the things that was exercising Kemi Badenoch's mind, and I have no doubt about this, was a risk that Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick and others may splinter on the right, the so-called right, and join Reform. And that was keeping Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives on that part of the political spectrum, as it were. And there was pressure on her to rediscover her Conservative roots. By throwing Suella Braverman and Jenrick under a bus, as Reform did last week, denouncing them, saying they're not welcome, they're part of the problem, etc., they've completely taken pressure off Kemi Badenoch to move to the so-called right of British politics. Because Suella ain't leaving, Jenrick ain't leaving, there's nowhere for them to go at the moment. So what you've got now is Reform that says it's going to be left of the Conservative Party by the next election. Conservative Party under no pressure to go to the so-called right. We need a voice. I'm not right-wing, by the way. I'm using these terms colloquially. But we need a pro-nation voice, unashamed pro-nation state, pro-freedom of speech, pro-democracy, pro-equality under the law, getting rid of all these regulations and laws that have infected us. And that argument has to be won. We've got to win that argument with the British people. Reform's not going to do it. The Conservatives are not going to do it. So Advance's job between now and 2028 is to win that argument, make the arguments that are required to be made in order to convince the British people that this is the agenda they need to vote for. And then, once we've done that, then we can sit down and see what the electoral landscape looks like, what requires to be done to ensure that you get the kind of government we need to save the country. We haven't got, it's too early to be talking about splitting of votes and allowing Labour in through the back door. Right now, we've got to win the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And the narrative's not being made.
Momentum's important in politics.
Yeah.
And there's definitely momentum with reform, although I think it's slowed recently. I think there are people rightfully questioning some of the things we're hearing from the party. But momentum is everything. I think if there was a general election tomorrow, I think they'd probably win. I just feel that people are so fed up with the Conservatives and the Labour Party. Reform are an outlet. For Advance to, I mean, you talk about needing a majority in government. For Advance to go from where it is now to winning a majority in government in 3 to 4 years' time, that's a lot of work.
It is.
If there was a scenario to work with reform and for reform to reform themselves, God, I can't believe I'm even saying these words, to become more nation state focused, to get away from this drift to the left, which I've witnessed myself and found disappointing, would that be a good outcome? If Nigel came out and started, with new policies that felt more aligned with Advance, do you think ultimately that would be a good idea?
So there are two things I think reform has to do. The first is that it's got to discover a political philosophy along the lines that I've just outlined and be robust in standing up for that political philosophy. And it's not at the moment. At the moment, it's making policies on the hoof. And it, 1 minute it talks about the need for cutting back the welfare state. The next minute it's removing the cap on 2 child benefits.
It's trying to appeal to everyone.
Yeah, it's trying to appeal to everyone. It needs to know what it wants to be. And it's absent a political philosophy. The persona of Farage is strong. Everyone thinks he's unashamedly pro-British and will fight with every last corpuscle that he's got for the country. But actually, if you look at what they're saying and doing, it's not quite the persona he has.
Is that a shift?
I think that's always we're seeing Farage for what Farage is. I think he's a political. So I've been very critical of Farage, and I really don't want to talk too much about Nigel Farage, but he is.
But this is useful context for voters.
Yeah,
like I'm an open vote at the moment. It's useful context for everyone, and I think there are people out there who and we've not been in the back rooms, but who believe Nigel Farage, Ben Habib, Rupert Lowe together would be a hell of a force.
I think it could be.
Yeah.
So the first thing I was going to say is that he needs a political philosophy on which he can hang his hat and say, this is what we stand for. This is how we're going to deliver it. I haven't seen that from Reform. And the second thing he needs is great people around him. He's got to get good people around, whether it's Rupert, me, others. It's almost academic, but he's got to get some heavyweight, capable people. That's why I was so disappointed to see Suella Braverman and Jenrick being thrown under a bus. If they'd joined Reform's team would, Suella Braverman, whatever you think of her stint as Home Secretary, she's a formidable politician. She said things as Home Secretary that I have never heard a Home Secretary say in modern times. She talked about the threat to Western civilization from our effectively taking down borders and our losing sight of the importance of nation states and so on. She said things which mainstream politicians haven't got the courage to say. She must be front and center of any movement that is to restore the United Kingdom. She has to be in it. I hope Jenrick will be in it and others like it. We've got to pull that all together. But Reform's not there yet. Reform is still playing the game of simply appealing to as many people as possible at any given moment in time. And this,
but that's why I think their momentum's it's losing.
It is. Well, they've lost members. I don't know if you look at their ticker; it's dropping.
Yeah,
and it's quite difficult to cancel yourself as a member. Once you're in, it's quite difficult to get out. We, by the way, Advance in 3 weeks, we've got 13,000 supporters and members. We've raised £130,000. We're charging £10 per head per annum until we get to 30,000 members, and so that's a pretty remarkable number of, I think we're like 6th or 7th by a number of members in the country in terms of size of political party. There is a desire for Advance out there. People want someone who's going to be absolutely rock solid in their political philosophy and, will stand for saving this country. There is demand out there, no doubt.
Could Rupert become an Advance MP?
I wanted Rupert to lead the party.
Okay.
I didn't want to set the party up round me. I set the party up round Rupert. I recognised a long time ago that reform wasn't the answer.
Okay.
When I resigned in November, I realised reform wasn't the answer. Forget about the history. I knew for a long time we needed a new party. But there wasn't room for a new party because reform was riding so high and the momentum was all behind it. It would have fallen flat on its face. But when Rupert was sacked in the way that he was sacked by reform, that, in my mind, opened up the opportunity for a new party because people, I thought, could see the terrible way in which Rupert Lowe had been treated. And the first thing I did was call Rupert, and we were already in touch. But I called Rupert and said, look, we got to set up a new party.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yeah, you're right, let's do it. So while he was fighting his court cases and getting the police complaint dropped, I went about setting up the constitution, getting control of an entity, getting a bank account. It might sound really mundane things, but these are fundamentally, prerequisites for getting a party going. And it wasn't really until Rupert had got rid of his police complaint, which was mid-May or so, I think that he reflected on it in detail. I think he said yes without really taking on board what it would mean to lead the party. He was going to be leader, and he'd agreed to be leader. And then when the police complaint was dropped, I think he came up for fresh air and decided he didn't want to be in party politics. He wanted to have this cross-party movement. And I was left then with Advance UK pretty much ready to go, but without a leader, which is why then I stepped up and became leader. But what's unique about Advance UK is that we are forming a college. Have you read about this? So unlike any other political party, we have a college, and that college will number between 50 to 100 people when it's at full tilt. And these will be people who are not paid by the party. They hold no public office. They will not be on anyone's shilling. They will be incapable of being swayed through pressure or inducement. They will be unconflicted, and they will be the heart, souls, guardians of our political philosophy, which is nation state, freedom of speech, democracy, and equality under the law. And these people will then appoint the leadership of the party and the executives and so on. But because we've got 100 people who are holding the political philosophy, who are guardians of our political philosophy, we won't be shifted as a party. We won't be able to pivot this way or that way. We will have to stay true to our mission statement.
How does that work in practice?
So if the leader of the party, in this case me, I'm unlikely to deviate because I set the mission statement. But if I were to deviate off the mission statement, the college could remove me as leader. With a simple majority, they could just remove me as leader, which is very different to reform. It's virtually impossible to get rid of Nigel Farage as leader. Indeed, the membership of Advance UK could, through a simple majority, remove me as a director of the company and therefore as leader. So there is deep accountability within Advance. And the reason we're going for 50 to 100 people in the college is that even if you pick up the odd person who might not be true to what you believe them to be true to, they won't be able to dilute the party's message because there'll only be one or two in 50.
And how do you choose these people?
So at the moment, we are going through an appointment process where if I recommend a college member, then they're interviewed by other people in the party who are not me to determine whether they're suitable for the party. But once we've got the party going, the party's not registered yet. It's just an entity with a bank account and a business plan. Once the party's registered, then it'll be for the membership to appoint members of the college. And indeed, anyone, if you're a member, and I strongly suggest you join Advance UK, Peter, you can then put yourself forward for the college if you'd like to.
I mean,
and you'll go through the process.
It's the kind of thing I'd like to do, but I always think, should I step back? Like, I've considered running for MP in Bedford.
Yeah.
We have Yassin Mohammed as the MP. He just lost his trade envoy because he voted against the disability legislation from the Starmer government. But the minute I become in a party, my interviews become a little bit more difficult. Yeah. You see, look, I like everything you stand for, Ben. I loved our last interview. I love everything you put out publicly. I don't find things I disagree with you on. And that's it. This is my challenge with reform, is that despite what people think of Zia, I actually like a lot of what he says publicly. He speaks the same language as me. But the party itself is doing things that I don't think align with what I personally want.
No.
I want strong conservatism.
Yeah, so do I.
I'm a strong believer in conservatism, small government, free speech, pro-growth, pro-trade, all those things. And the problem with the Reform government at the moment is that I feel like they're trying to take the opposite position of the Conservatives and the Labour at the party at the same time to try and win every vote. And it's not working because they're diluting what they are. And so I'm gradually losing my faith in what they've said they will deliver. Right now, if there's a vote tomorrow, and I probably would vote, I'd be split between the Conservatives and Reform right now because, there's a part of me that will swing back to Conservatives because I think, well, at least they're trying to become Conservatives again. They're not doing a strong enough job. But I think Reform are starting to lose people like me.
I think Reform doesn't stand for anything in particular. That's the problem. That's why I say they need a political philosophy.
Yeah.
Nigel Farage is a cunning political expedient. He's been very, very clever at recognizing over the last quarter of a century trends and playing to those trends and satisfying the trend. But we're beyond trends. This is what I've been trying to say to Nigel, is that we're beyond trends. You know, when the country was safe, when our existence was assured, there was room for some political expediency, say what you need to say to get into office, maybe. But right now, we don't need a cunning fox. We need a pride of lions to save the country. You talked about populists being able to identify all the problems but not have the solutions.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I want the college is because I want a depth and breadth of really great thinking, capable people in the party who will help the party create the policies and the legislation needed, the draft legislation needed, to deliver us to safety, to make sure the leadership is held to account. One of the problems with political parties is the leadership exercises too much control. The leadership has the gift of who's going to stand in safe seats, who's going to make policies, how those policies are made. The executive are doing everything. And there's no one sitting outside the executive saying, no, you're not going to do that because that's not good for the country, or that's not consistent with being a conservative and unionist or whatever it is. CCHQ has got control completely of the Conservative Party.
I know.
You know, and Kemi is of that mold. And what the Conservatives need to do is to find that breadth and heft of intellectual capability that has the same political philosophy that will save the country. And that's one of the reasons I want the college. I want people there who can do it.
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this. You can go and read the books. But the truth is, it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com. There are strands within the Conservative Party. I've been very impressed with both Nick Timothy and Katie Lamb.
Oh, yeah, I'm superb. And Suella and Jenrick. I mean, there are lots of good people, no doubt. But the party itself is incapable of giving them the voice and the support that they need. I totally agree with Suella Braverman that she may have been Home Secretary, but she didn't have the support of the party, the infrastructure, or the people. She was neutered as Home Secretary. Sunak, she should have never taken the post, probably. But, you know, in that case, you never rise to any challenge. And so Advance, just to come back to Advance for a second, so Advance is going to unashamedly make these arguments. Advance is going to attract as much high-caliber talent as it possibly can. And we're going to take the fight to Reform and to the Conservative Party. We're going to show the nation what needs to be done. And then we are going to hopefully poll well. And depending on how we poll, we'll determine our electoral strategy. But we will do what's needed to save this country.
Is the door still open to Rupert?
Of course. Oh my God.
He feels, because you see it in the comments when I did another interview with him recently. He's really, really well liked and respected.
Yeah.
Really well liked and respected. And Restore is interesting. I'm not sure on capital punishment yet, but again, speaks a lot of my language, a lot of things I'm interested in. There feels like a natural alignment between the two of you. People want you two to be working together.
Yeah, I want Rupert to be part of Advance, but he doesn't think it's right time for a political party. I can't think of a better time for a political party because, as you rightly point out, we've only got 4 years to the next election. We better get our act together. We need to move. We need to move fast. A movement. There are lots of movements. There's there's the New Culture Forum. There's Together. There's the Unite the Kingdom movement. There are lots of movements in the country. We need a political force that can deliver at the ballot box. Ultimately, you've got to be able to represent your electorate. You can't do that in a movement. You can make the arguments. You can't win an election and deliver.
Do you get confidence from the speed of which reform came from nowhere to lead in the polls?
100%. Because I was part of that creation. Yeah. We went from, when I was one thing I was going to say to you, you said the challenge is vast for Advance. Yeah, sure. We went from 6% in the polls when I joined Reform in March 23 to 16% in the polls just before the general election. And we got 14% in the general election, getting 5 seats. We mustn't also underestimate the splintering generally in the electoral landscape. Reform got 5 seats with the same number of votes in which it got no seats in 2015.
Yep.
And the electorate is changing. It's not a two-party system anymore. It's much more promiscuous, if I can use that word. And I think there's every chance, if Advance plays its cards right, that it can be a very significant force for good.
So what's the timetable now for the party?
So we've got to get to 30,000 members before we apply to the Electoral Commission for registration. I wanted that hurdle because I wanted to prove to myself that my assessment that a new party is wanted is reflected in the people. 30,000 members would be a really good achievement. That's the number of members Reform had at the beginning of the general election last year. So I know with 30,000 people we can fight elections. So that that's my first hurdle. I want to get the college in place, and then we apply for registration with the Electoral Commission, and then I think our target's going to be 2029. We're not going to be targeting local elections, and I mean, we might fight some. I'm not saying we won't. But the aim has got to be to get bums on green seats in 2029 and to set the narrative so that the nation understands what's required to be done and to produce the solutions through my college and, others in the party to produce the solutions. That's our task before 2029.
How do you, and a lot of people don't like this question, but how do you see Tommy Robinson in all of this? Because he is himself a political force now. But he's a hot potato. It's kind of like, there's things that people agree with him on, disagree with him on, but he has a huge following. And I'm wondering where he's aligning himself.
Yeah, so no doubt we'll find out where he aligns himself. But Tommy Robinson, where do I start Tommy Robinson? So he's a working class boy who was very early on able to identify the symptoms of this globalization and the ill effects that it was happening at a domestic level in this country, including obviously multiculturalism, the gang rapes and everything else that he's been so vocally identifying. Tommy Robinson has taken the path of maximum resistance because he's identified the symptoms and he's attacked the symptoms and he's revealed the symptoms. And the institutions that govern this country didn't like it because he was attacking their very existence, in a sense. The ideology which creates these institutions was being attacked by Tommy Robinson, and he did it in a very vocal way, in a way that using colourful language that you and I may not be prepared to use because it's like that. And there's no doubt in my mind that the establishment turned on Tommy Robinson, in part because of the language he uses, in part because of the message that he was delivering, which was deeply damaging to the establishment, but also significantly in part because he's working class. They felt they could target him. You've got tattoos. I don't. But, he was a tattooed up working class lad from Luton. The establishment thought they could take this guy down. Now, I'm not going to be an apologist for Tommy Robinson. No way. I mean, I don't know every inch of every case that he's fought but I do know that last year he was incarcerated because he was a political prisoner. Absolutely. Yes. No doubt in my mind. And Reform should have called that out. Yep. Reform should have said, notwithstanding his colourful language, notwithstanding his colourful past, he is a political prisoner right now. He was shut down because of showing a film. The Attorney General stepped into a civil action and turned it effectively into a criminal contempt of court case and sent him to the slammer. Most civil actions, if they end up in contempt of court, do not result in someone going to prison. They don't do it. They get a fine or whatever, but they don't go to prison.
Very, very rare.
Very, very rare.
And certainly not solitary confinement.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. And Reform should be banging that drum. And why they don't do it is because they're fearful of mainstream. And this is where Nigel's kind of cunningness, I think, comes a little unstuck. Because what the nation is crying out for right now is not to duck and dive and bob and weave. The nation wants a line. It wants someone to stand up and say...
honesty. Just wants honesty.
Yeah.
I think we're fed up of being lied to. I think we've had to go through too many scandals. We've watched a horrific rape crisis, which clearly has a cover-up, which I've got no idea how high it goes. We've watched our nation be teared apart. I think we just want a consistent, honest message about restoring, advancing, reforming the UK back to a place of fairness and opportunity.
Yeah. That's what you will get from Advance. And let me also be clear from Advance. I'm not a populist in the sense that I want to stir up trouble. I do not want to stir up trouble.
Good.
I want the United Kingdom to be at peace. I want people to be at peace. But there's going to be some tough medicine that we're going to have to swallow in order to get to that place. And we've got to find the best mechanism of doing it. The longer we leave it to correct course, the more difficult it's going to become. And it's already very, very difficult to correct course, but it needs to be done.
So let's have a vision of an Advance growing fast, really accelerating, finding good people to be in the party. Just say we live in a world where Advance becomes
the government.
The government.
Yeah.
What are the immediate things that you do as a government? What's your message to the voters?
So, the first few things that I would. Can I just go back one step?
Yeah, of course.
I'd be as a government, I'd be having an eye on what's happening in the US. I would need to know that I would need to know the result of the next election in the US, and I very hopefully get another Republican, hopefully someone like J.D. Vance as president. Then we know that the pro-nation state agenda by the most powerful country in the world is going to be continued to be delivered. And with the knowledge that that's the case, on my first day in government, this is what I would do. I would have a moratorium on the granting of indefinite leave to remain and British citizenship in this country. We need to stop embedding the problems that mass migration has created for the country. We need to pause it while we then address it. I would withdraw from the European Convention of Human Rights, and I would repeal the Human Rights Act and the Equalities Act. These are all seismic things, by the way, at day one. None of this would affect the economy straight off, but it would have a very adverse reaction from the international institutions of which we're members, including we're not a member of the EU, but we'll get a kickback from the EU. I would also repudiate the Northern Ireland Protocol. I would tear it up and throw it aside and say, that's it, Northern Ireland's part of the United Kingdom. I'm sorry, boys. And that too will be very, very challenging. But if we get a Republican government in the US, we will have the protection we need as a country to be able to withstand the impact of the EU's reaction. The EU's reaction and the UN's reaction and so on the whole, is going to be economic. It's not going to be they're not going to go to war with the UK. They're going to try and, put up trade barriers and stuff like that. And we therefore then also need to be utterly ready to cut regulations that are impeding trade, cut taxes, make the UK a really attractive place to work. It'll be a necessity for the constitutional reforms that we put in place. It's a necessity that we relax our economic, all the burdens around our economy are removed. It's absolutely critical. Ditch net zero. Got to ditch net zero. We've got to allow the cheapest forms of energy to be used by the United Kingdom. And there will, I think, be economic adversity to start with. I think it would be wrong to say that it's all going to be plain sailing, because when the EU cuts up rough, there will be a period of reaction that will, cause trouble.
Yeah.
But that's what we got to do. And we've got to cut taxes on the working and middle classes. And we've got to slash costs dramatically. We've got to get a grip of the welfare bill. We've got 7.7 million people on universal credit. We've got a labour market that's not working. That's 7.7 million people out of 31 million workforce. Tells you how bad. 3 million of them aren't even looking for a job. They need tough love. They need that protective blanket. Many of them need that protective blanket just removed. There are some, obviously, who need the protection of the state, the support, genuinely unable to work, need their disability benefits, etc. But there are many malingerers, and they must be outed. And we may not get it right. We may inadvertently damage the legitimate interests of some genuinely disabled people. But in the pursuit of getting this country back on its feet again, we need tough love at the welfare end. And we've got to fundamentally, at an economic level, Peter, I'm sure you'll agree with this, this is going to sound populist, but it's true. We've got to get rid of dependency and allow...
I completely agree.
And create aspiration. And you do that through cutting welfare and reducing taxes on working middle classes and small, medium-sized businesses, etc. And we've got to stop this thing of wealth redistribution. You've got to make your money. So, for example, if I wanted to give rise to resurgent growth in our population, I wouldn't do it through removing the cap on two-child benefit. I would give tax breaks to couples who get married, and I'd give tax breaks to couples who have children. At the moment,
restore the family unit.
Yeah, support the family unit, but through the tax system. So they have to work to get the protection and support that they want. You don't get it if you're not working. Are you with me?
No, I do. Yeah, I'm totally with you. Look, again, I see it all at a local level. I've interviewed 2 people now from Switzerland, just intrigued by their model. And the thing that always comes back to me is 94% of our tax revenue goes through Whitehall. In Switzerland, it's only 40% goes through central government. And I think we centralise everything too much around central government. We haven't got enough autonomy locally where people know the local system, they understand the local system, who can support the local economy. These one-size-fits rules, I think they're very destructive locally. I think business rates, I think they just need to go. Yeah. They're destructive to the town centre.
It's a tax on the activity of business. If you just wish to have a business, you're paying tax. Yes. I mean, how can that be right?
Tax on the birth. It's the tax on the birth of a business. Yeah.
It's awful.
Very, very damaging. Have you looked much at the size of the bill of government, and is there any obvious areas to cut? Because this is one of the challenges when you look at the government's budget, whatever it is 1.15 trillion. You start to think, well, where can we cut? Where are the opportunities?
Yeah, so
that's where it feels difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, so you've got to look at the economic ecosystem as a whole. I mean, the first thing to do is ditch net zero, and that'll take a lot of burden of cost off people instantly. Businesses will become more profitable instantly when you get rid of net zero. Remove the super tax on fossil fuel companies. I mean, I know people in the oil industry who say that even if they're granted licenses for the North Sea, they don't want to go and do anything in the North Sea because there's no point doing it. You pay 78% to the government. They might as well get, I don't know if you saw, BP has sold its renewable energy business in the States. It's going back to being a fossil fuel company in the States. It would do the same here if it was given the right incentive. Trump's effectively allowed BP to do that in the US. And we need that here. But just in terms of cutting costs, okay, so net zero would get rid of a lot of costs in the economy, including costs in government. But the welfare bill is over 300 billion. You just have to be dramatically ruthless with it. You've 150 of the 300 billion is pensions, but the other 150 you've got to slash in half.
But does even the pensions need reform? Does the triple lock need reform?
Yeah, the triple lock does need reform. We can't print money. It does need reform. As painful as it is, we do need reform at the pension end as well. We do need to remove the possibility of all foreigners getting benefits. At the moment, I don't know if you saw this release last week, 12 billion being spent on benefits for foreigners. They've got to be encouraged to go home to their countries if they're foreigners. They shouldn't be here if they're on benefits. we've got to reduce the burden on our housing. And you do that in part, obviously, by also addressing mass immigration. We've got so many people coming to this country, we can't get Brits on the housing ladder or into the NHS, etc., etc.
There's a lot to do.
There's a hell of a lot to do. There's a hell of a lot to do. But there's no one Gordian knot that needs cutting. It's the coming together of lots of different policies which will put the country straight again. It's a holistic approach.
Are you optimistic?
I'm totally optimistic. I would not be optimistic if Trump wasn't in office.
Okay,
but I think the fact that Trump is there and he's doing it, and I don't care what the detractors say, it's going to come right. You will see America's economy doing well, and then we will look at it and go, yeah, we need some of that. And he did it last time. Do you remember last time when he was president, he said, I'm going to cut corporation tax. And everyone said, oh, why do you need to cut corporations? It's such a point. No, it's not going to. And it worked. America was booming until lockdowns. America was booming.
Well, look at Ireland.
Trump. What? Look at Ireland.
Look at Ireland.
Ireland has a corporation tax take, a third of the United Kingdom's, and it's a tiddly economy by comparison to the United Kingdom because it has a low corporation tax rate, 12.5% versus our 25%.
Its GDP per capita, I think, is about 3 times ours.
Yeah.
I looked it up. It's one of the highest in the world.
So there you go.
Yeah.
You can get this put right. It needs bravery. It needs competence. It needs a plan. And it needs the preparedness to deliver that plan on the first day in government. It can't be the second day. It's got to be the first day. You've got to burn all these things on the first day.
What's driving you with all this, Ben? Because you could easily go, like I've considered sometimes, I just can't be bothered. What's driving you on this?
I'm 60. My children are more or less grown up. They have enough money now, if I die, to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the life that this country gave me, and I want to protect that legacy. And I see this country going to the dogs, and I want to save for future generations, including my children and their children's generation, the brilliant kind of life that I had. That's what I want. I grew up really optimistic about life. I thought life was just fantastic. Every morning, I used to love to get up and go to work and do a deal, make some money, do this, do that. I want everyone to have that. I want everyone to get I think the government's done its job when everyone gets out of bed in the morning and thinks, great, I'm glad to be alive. Of course, you never get there, but that's got to be the aim.
Well, listen, I wish you the best of luck with this. Is there anything we've not touched on you would have wanted to?
No, I think, I hope I wasn't too repetitive.
No, you weren't.
Through it, but no, I think we really touched on a lot. And before we reform, we have to restore. We've got to get the United Kingdom back on its feet again. And we've got to be capable and brave to do that. And we shouldn't worry about the electoral strategy for 2029.
Yeah.
This Labour government's going to go. What we should worry about is getting the right narrative, the right plan, the right story into the British electorate psyche, and then have the people there to deliver that plan.
Yeah, I agree. They won't be in power. I think Labour's cooked already. I fear we replace it with another limp government that doesn't actually do anything. I'm very interested in Advance. I think what you're doing is very interesting. I will definitely pay more attention. I hope there's a stronger alignment with Rupert. I'm very impressed with Rupert. I stand by what I said before. I think a Nigel, Ben Habib, Rupert coalition would be a very strong force for change. And I hope Reform are listening because they're starting to lose people. But look, I will pay close attention.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll talk again over the next couple of years. And yeah, wish you all the best of luck. Good luck with it. Thank you for everything you're doing.
No, thank you.
And thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you soon.